Hi, everybody. I'm Tara O'Hyan, and I'm the Director of Early Childhood here at the Goldberg Early Childhood Center at the Aaron Family JCC in Dallas. I'm really excited to be here with Dave Stanton, who is our Assistant Director, and Crystal Lucha, who is our Pedagogista. And we are really happy to be discussing wonderful things that happen in our classrooms. Today, we're going to give you an idea of development and what happens in each age level. We want you to keep in mind there is a wide range. So when you hear things that we're talking about, know that some children are at different stages of their development in many different areas. Once we know the children well, then we are able to really tailor our education to their specific needs at that time. We are going to share with you what to expect developmentally in your age level, and also how our educators facilitate this learning in our program. Hello, everybody. I am here with Dave and Crystal, and we are really excited today to be talking to you about our pre-K program. And Crystal, pre-K is a big year. You know, people are thinking about kindergarten, applying to private schools. And the big question I get all the time is my child going to be ready for kindergarten? And so can you tell me kind of a general idea of how we look at kindergarten readiness?
Sure. I think kindergarten readiness is such a big label. It encompasses so many things. But I think for us, it's really all about developing the whole child. Our goal when we send children to their next step is not to have them be successful just in kindergarten, but really to be successful in life. And so we're sending them off with skills like, their flexible thinking and their problem solving and those 21st century skills that are really important to just long-term success. But with that being said, that doesn't mean that we're not sending children to be ready for kindergarten specifically. We're providing a lot of opportunities in pre-K for children to fall in love with learning and to fall in love with math concepts and language and literacy. And there's a lot of structured and unstructured kind of experiences in the classroom where teachers might be guiding some writing that's happening and journaling at the same time where they might be more free to explore writing independently in the writing center in the same way that they could be diving deeper into writing their own books and creating stories over here, or they're just reading books independently on the carpet. So there's a balance there between providing these open-ended play experiences for our children to just explore and more intentionally planned out kind of those learning experiences that our teachers are really facilitating in the classroom. So I think that Dave is probably going to talk a little bit more about specifics about how our teachers are diving deeper with the children.
All right. Well, thank you, Crystal. And I ask you to do me a favor and please don't tell my 3-year-old or my 5-year-old this, but 4 years old is my absolute favorite age in the world to work with. I have worked with every age from babies on up through high school, and pre-K is really, I think, where my heart lies as an educator. It was the last age I taught here before leaving the classroom, and I'm excited to get to share this with you here right now. So in language and literacy, it's those same 6 skills of language and literacy that we've been talking about with toddlers and 2-year-olds and pre-K, but we're starting to see the skills within those really continue to move forward to where they're getting maybe from that pre-literacy that we've been building towards the starting of being literate in both terms of reading and writing and engaging with books. Okay, so what does that actually look like in the classroom? So conversations are going to be much more involved in pre-K than we saw the year before in the 3s. You have children really independently engaging in long conversations. And sometimes my favorite part of being a pre-K teacher was just to be able to sit back with a notepad and sort of write the conversations they would have down about like the game they were playing outside and what the rules should be, or at the lunch table when they were talking about what they were going to do at soccer practice after, or the movie they'd seen the night before, and really seeing them engaging and taking interest in what their peers have to say. You're really getting into where you have sustained 2-way conversations in this age. You're also getting to where kids are really understanding how to use language and how to express themselves. And so you'll have kids that learn how to ask a question with their voice going up at the end. And you'll have kids that get really excited. And you'll have kids that know, like, maybe if they're talking about something sad, their affect is going to reflect that. And they can really match their language and their body and how it sounds. And one of the other things we talk about, they're really more independent in their storytelling. So one of my favorite things to do with pre-K classes was always to explore a familiar fairy tale. So you could take, Goldilocks and the Three Bears and explore that, act that out, look at some alternate versions. My favorite is Mo Willems' Goldilocks and the Three Dinosaurs. But then you could also do it where you could play around with the story. And so when Goldilocks gets ready to run out of the house, what happens? And then have the children help finish that, right? And they're able to tweak familiar stories and put endings to them. They could change details. Maybe they didn't have chairs that they were sitting in. Maybe they were lying in hammocks or something like that in the story, and have kids start to play around with narratives and creating their own. And a lot of times them creating their own is them taking a familiar story or familiar characters that they like to play with and putting a little bit of a twist on it, right? With phonological awareness, so playing around with language and sounds and things like that, they're really able to understand now some of the differences between similar sounding words and able to articulate it. So what I mean by that is you could have a child that says words like bath and ball, and they could tell you that they both start with a b, but they end, one of them ends with a l and one of them ends with a th, right? They end with a different sound. Or wall and ball sound similar, but they have a different sound at the start. So they can hear and understand those differences of the words. They may not quite be able to put the sound or the letter with them, but they can tell you that they sound the same, but they're a little different at the start, or they're a little different at the end. They're able to play around with words like backpack, right? And understand that it's putting the word back and the word pack together. And it's a pack you wear on your back, but they might understand how to separate those out, or how to put words together to make new words, or to understand words that they're not as familiar with, right? That if you ask somebody what a blackboard was, right? And we don't have blackboards anymore. Occasionally you still see whiteboards in classrooms, but we don't have a blackboard anymore, but they could understand if you break it apart that there's a board and it's black, and that would give them some sort of context to of what that word might mean. And they also are very good at recognizing and generating words that rhyme. So might be songs like Down by the Bay, it might be Dr. Seuss books. One of the great things about so many children's books, right, is they're built in that rhyming pattern because kids are able to follow along. It engages them, and they'll start recognizing and saying, hey, ring and sing rhyme, or they might say, hey, ring and sing sound the same. And they can probably come up with their own ones like that. We would play Willoughby Wallaby when it was time to get up and leave the classroom. And, in order to pace that out, it would be Willoughby Wallaby Woo, an elephant sat on you. Willoughby Wallaby Wee, an elephant sat on me. Willoughby Wallaby Wake, an elephant sat on Jake. And so you're making up, and you're having them start to do it. And you're changing those sounds. And they're able to identify kind of what words go together through playing things like that throughout the day, and build their facility with language. Print awareness. So when they're looking at a book, they can answer a lot of questions about what's happening in that book just by looking at the pictures. They might be able to make a prediction about what the book's going to be about from looking at the cover. It might be in a book like the Lorax or something like that, where you have the axes coming through and whacking down the trees, that they can talk about what's happening there, that trees are being chopped down and things like that, and all the different truffula fruits are falling on the ground. They really do understand by this age that print kind of goes across the page from left to right. And towards the end of the year, they're going to be able to associate a lot of sounds with letters for the most part. You're going to see a wide range of development with this. And I think that in pre-K, one of the amazing things and one of the challenging things is that kids are developing so differently, and they have so much more knowledge and so much more range as they've gotten older, that you may have kids that are just starting to identify letters, and you may have kids that are starting to put together letters to make words, and everything in between. And everybody's really going at the pace that fits them. And the awesome thing is they'll end up in the same place. They may not end up in the same place in pre-K, but at some point that explosion is going to hit, whether it's kindergarten or first grade, and they're really going to take off running and end up in the same place as far as the reading and the writing goes, but it's happening at different speeds. So when I say that at the end of the year, a lot of them will know many of the sounds that a letter makes. Some of your pre-Kers may come into the year knowing a lot of that, and we can work with them from there. And some of them may come in or at the end of the year and may only know a few, and that's also okay. You know, one of the things that we try to do is make it fun and enjoyable and really have them be motivated. And we want to have, first and foremost, that love be there, because that love being there is what's going to make it take off when they're ready for it. So with books and with literacy, one of the things we really want them to understand is that there's a purpose to them, right? And so that there's a purpose to language and that it's useful for them. So if we want to be entertained, we may read a fiction book. If we want to learn about space, we may go get some nonfiction books from our library and pull those down to learn about the stars and learn about the planets and do some research on it. And what are the different types of books that we read together in the classroom? And what does that tell us about the type of information that may be within them? At this age, you know, we may spend longer discussing a book and the concepts that are in a book than it actually takes to read it. So if I go back to the book, The Lorax, right? And we talk about what does it mean to chop down trees? Who used to live in the trees? And have these big, long conversations about how do you think they felt and what would happen if they didn't have a tree to live in? And you'd have these long conversations and really get into some deep concepts with the kids off of a book that may have taken like 15 minutes to read, but it may sustain conversations for days and days and days in a classroom. And part of that is they're absorbing it, they're understanding the meaning, and they can answer those questions. They can make predictions ahead of time about what's going to be in the book. They can answer those questions as you're going through. And most importantly, they really internalize the stories and they can reflect on them and answer those questions after the book as well. And as we're going through books and reading in the classroom, right, we're talking about the different features of a book. So it may be that if I pull out a nonfiction book and we want to learn how to do research on planets, but we actually don't want to learn about all the planets. We just want to learn about Mars because Johnny saw something about the Mars rover this weekend and he's really into it and wants to learn more and wants to share it with his friends. And we go get a book about the planets and we look in the glossary at the end and see if it tells us anything about Mars, or we look in the index at the end and says, oh, Mars 6, what does that mean? That means I turn to page 6 and let's go back to the start and find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here we go. There's the 6 in the corner and we can learn about the Mars rover there. So they're really understanding how to use print like that. And they're understanding there's print in other places besides books, right? There's print on the packages of food they buy. There's print on the names and signs at restaurants and stores. There's print when you write a grocery list. There's print all over the place, street signs, everything, right? That gives us information and it conveys meaning. And one thing kids want is they want meaning. They want to understand the world, and showing them how they can do it through language and understanding language and reading is one of the things that's really happening in pre-K in an intentional way. So their vocabulary at this age is really exploding. You'll see there, it says demonstrates an understanding of 3,000 to 4,000 words. That doesn't mean they're using all of them, right? This is receptive language. So words that they understand, if we were to use them in conversation, they can make meaning of them. And it doesn't mean they have to understand those words you see there in parentheses. If they don't understand exclusive or wilderness or nervous or things like that, that's totally okay. But those are the types of words that if they're understanding similar sorts of words, you know you're probably in the right ballpark of 3,000 to 4,000 words of receptive vocabulary, words that they're understanding when they hear it. One of the other things we're seeing is the sentences are getting a little longer. By the end of the year, we're probably using 6, 8, 10 word sentences, and it's always increasing a little bit in complexity throughout the year. And one of my favorite things about pre-K is this is where answering the question why really starts to take on meaning. When we hear like a 3-year-old answer the question why, a lot of times it goes back to the logic, like it either goes back to logic that doesn't make sense, or it basically is just because, even if they have more words to it, right? So why did you eat that? Because I ate it could be the answer. They may understand the form of the question, and why usually involves the because, but in pre-K, you're starting to get rationale and thought processes happening behind the why. And a lot of what that helps us do as educators in pre-K is understand children's thinking. And one of the really neat things about working with kids this age is really trying to take their thinking, and instead of trying to correct it, instead of trying to say, well, actually, it works this way, or actually what happened in the book is this, providing something that challenges their thinking and requires them to think, oh, well, if I thought that cutting down the trees would be good because there was more sunlight, what would that mean for all the animals that lived in the trees, right? And give them a challenge of that, like, to say they still may decide that it was a good idea to cut down the trees. They really like sunlight, they like to play in the sunlight, that's fine. But providing some questions that challenge their thinking and require them to go a little bit deeper and explain their thought process and see if it's something they're attached to, see if it's something they're passionate about, or seeing if you can provide kind of a counter example that may move them forward a little bit, is one of the things that we're able to do at Circle Time when we're talking about books. Also do it throughout the day with understandings of different concepts in math, science, and lots of different things to try to give them something that pushes their thinking just a little bit deeper and sees where they can go with it. By the end of the year, we are expecting to recognize some sound letter correspondence. So understanding that M makes and P says P, and T says T. Right? And that they're starting to understand, doesn't need to be those 3 specifically, but they're understanding that about a number of letters. They may not have it for all of them, but they're putting together sounds with letters, and that they're knowing almost all, if not all of their letters, both upper and lowercase. So in the 3s, we saw a lot more lowercase, uppercase letters. In the pre-K, they're gonna start to recognize a lot more uppercase and lowercase letters. Still probably primarily see their writing, which we're going to talk about next, in uppercase, but they're recognizing that both letters may mean the same thing. So what should they be doing with their fine motor? And this is where you'll start to see it is a huge range in what we might see in pre-K. And you may have kids that do come in and are still in the pre-literate stage, and you may have ones that have on rare occasions moved out of the transitional, and they may be writing some words that they know and things like that as well. And there's a very wide range. And one of the nice things is the way that we structure our curriculum, it really lets us meet all of those kids where they are developmentally and help them get to the next step, regardless of where they are currently. So what does it look like? You may have kids that are writing things that look kind of like letters, and they're mixed up with numbers and things like that when they're working in the writing center. You may have ones that are just writing together long strings of letters that don't really make a word, but they're starting to play around with it and understand that these are the things that I write to make words. And they may even show it to you and say, what is this QPTR say? And you're like, crypture, and somehow try to figure out how you can make a word without any vowels in it. Usually you're going to see those all in capital letters, and usually they'll probably be ones from their own name, ones that they're very familiar with. And then as they start to progress in their writing, what you're going to see is them starting to look a little bit more like words. So that means they might start leaving a space. They might write 4 letters, and then they're going to leave a space and write 4 more letters, and then leave a space and write 6 letters. And they're understanding the format like that they've been seeing in books for all these years that we've been reading together, that there's a group of letters that go together to make a word. May not be real words. They're probably not real words at this point in time, but they may go with the illustrations that they're making in the art center, or they may sit down and want to write a letter or a shopping list or something like that in the writing center in dramatic play. They may want to draw and label a diagram that they've made in the block center with a clipboard and a pencil of the buildings that they built with their friends, and draw it and write parking lot. And you may see, 6 random letters that go together to say that, but to them it says parking lot. And then what we're going to start seeing in the next stage happening there is labeling their pictures. And so for something like parking lot, I might see a P. And for building, I might see a B. And for the car in the parking lot, I might see a C or a K or something like that there. And if that's something our class is really into, buildings and parking lot and construction and all of that, then in our writing center, what you're going to see is cards that have the image of something like a building with the word building on it. They might have an image of a car with the word car on it, and if it's construction, an excavator with the word excavator on it. And you would see kids coming over and saying, oh, I want to write excavator. And they would pick out the excavator card and they put it down, and then they would carefully copy it, and they'll do a pretty good job of copying it, right? And that's one of the stages of writing. They're learning how to that environmental print means something, and how to take it and write it so that they can also create meaning with their writing, right? And being able to have meaningful writing is what really drives that love of writing and pushes kids forward, at the pace that they're ready for. So you're going to see that copy and print that they see around. And then you're going to start seeing things that may look more like getting closer and closer to sentences. So if we're working in our journals, and a lot of times towards the second part of the year, the kids are becoming more familiar with writing. We've done shared writing all together as a group where they're coming up with words, and the teachers might be writing and kids might be helping write like a few small words and things like that, that they're ready to start working in their own journals. And for some kids, it may happen in October. Some kids, it may happen in like February. But our goal is that they're there and they're participating in journal writing. And we're working on it as a class. And they're writing something about the butterflies that we've been studying that have come in the spring. And they might draw a picture of the butterfly in cage, and they might write B and C. And for what that means for them, it's butterfly in cage. But you're just getting that one sound that they're hearing at the start of it, right? And then you may start to get 2 letters that go with it. So for cage, you might get CG as the kids are starting to get more complex. You may get them putting like 3 sounds for ones that are really advanced. Now I'm talking about like independently in those cases. If we're to sit there and work with them, which we do and which you can do at home, you may be able to sound out a number of sounds in butterflies. Might be possible to hear. Usually the short vowel sounds are hard for them to hear, but they might hear the B and the T and the F and the L and the I, right? And that becomes butterfly for them. Again, that's probably more with teacher or parent assistance that you're going to see that many sounds in there, but you'll see them adding more sounds towards the end. Once they're starting to understand, they can really do that with the sound symbol correspondence they have and put that to use in their writing. So math concepts. Again, we're using that exploding vocabulary. We talked about thousands of words, right? Now to explore even more deeply the same math concepts we've been talking about since being in toddlers, right? And so you can see now how this is all building on one another, and that step 1 might be when they're 1, step 2 and 3 when they're 2, 3, 4, 5 when they're 3, and now we're into more advanced concepts here. in the pre-K, but it's all building on the steps that we saw happen earlier. So in number sense, they could look at a group and they could figure out, maybe it's obvious, maybe it's like 20 kids in our class and only 8 in the toddler class. And we know we have more kids in there, but maybe we're trying to figure out which of the 2 toddler classes we passed in the hall had more kids there today, and we have to count them. They can figure out how to count and figure out who has more or less, do they have the same amount there today? Is it equal, right? And then you're talking about the concepts of greater than or less than and equal and more and less and all of that. They're able to do one-to-one correspondence up to 10, and usually they may well be able to get past that, but we're looking for them to be able to do that. And what that means, it's not rote counting up to 10. For that, we generally expect them to be able to get to at least 30. Many can go far beyond that, to just count and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way on up. But one-to-one correspondence would mean we want to figure out how many cubbies there are in the class to see if there's an extra cubby that a new student coming in can use. We know we have 12 kids in our class. Let's go count. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's the idea of each individual cubby represents that number, right? So that they can then count up to 12 accurately, see if there's another one for that new student that's coming in to join them. That they're recognizing a lot more numbers. So we expect them to recognize numbers up to 19. Again, many will understand how to recognize numbers beyond that. They're going to see numbers throughout the classroom and throughout the JCC that may even go into the triple digits, right? Like one of the very fun things in pre-K is counting up to the 100th day of school and hitting that. Some of the classes then like to count back towards the end. My year in pre-K, we kept counting and it was up until like 160, and it was always fun to see what prediction for what the next number was going to be would be, and would we be able to make it all the way around the classroom. We came up a little short, which was disappointing, but they get to see numbers far bigger and they get to understand numbers far bigger than that. But we're looking for them to sort of be able to automatically recognize numbers up to 19. They're understanding how to count by tens. So one way we do that is sometimes getting up to the 100th day of school and making groups of 10. And so if we want to have 100 things to represent the 100th day of school, you may bring in a beautiful bag or make one at school that has different sets of 10 objects that you want to turn into a collage. So it might be counting out 10 gems, and might be counting out 10 flower petals that I picked and things like that. And, 10 pieces, 10 sequins. And all together, I'm going to have 100 objects and be able to count. This is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, up to 100. And then, through doing activities like that, they learn how to count by 10, even if we don't say, today we're going to count by tens. They are able to do simple equations. And by that, maybe equations is a little bit misleading, though we can always write it down and label it for them. We're not necessarily expecting them to be able to write it down. But what I mean by that is they're going to be able to do basic addition and subtraction based on things that are actually happening in the classroom, right? So if we have 12 students and we're missing 2 today, how many friends are here today, right? So if we have 12, and we can use any number of strategies in a classroom to figure that out. We could use unifix cubes and make sure we have 12 with our one-to-one correspondence, and then take 2 away and see how many do we have left. We could have 12 friends stand up. I guess not if they're not there that day, but you could have, people use 12 fingers and take 2 away, and then you see you have 10 left. Any sorts of strategies like that, but they're understanding how to do things like that. Same thing with combining, right? If we have 4 apples for snack and 4 oranges for snack, how many pieces of fruit do we have all together? Well, let's get them out and let's count them before we cut them up. And we have 4 plus 4, that equals 8. We have 8 pieces of fruit, and they can do simple math problems that are relevant to them because they're not necessarily conceptualizing them as math, even if they're doing the computational work behind it. right? They're just thinking of how do I solve this problem that was presented to me. So spatial relationships. One of the coolest things I think that happens more in pre-K than in other ages is children are taking charge of different parts of the classroom. So in, for example, dramatic play, they may be wanting to turn their dramatic play into a bus. They're really into different kinds of transportation and they want to build it. And one of the things the pre-K teachers will do is say, okay, let's map out. What are the different sort of objects we have that we can move to make a bus, and what might we need to get, and how could we do that? And so kids are having to design that, and they're having to label shapes, right, and figure out how do they fit together in order to build something like that. Or similarly for designing, we just had a class that in the woodworking studio was designing Hanakiot, and they were planning out ahead of time and drawing what they wanted to do and then getting the materials. And when they're drawing, they're using the shapes that they've learned. They're using rectangles, they're using circles, they're using squares. They're trying to maybe draw something that looks a little bit like a cylinder, right? And some of the 3D shapes they know. And they're putting them to use in a planning stage in a way that develops their executive functioning as well to plan out what they want to do. And then they're executing that plan. So when we talk about measurement in the classroom in pre-K, we're talking about it in several different areas. We're talking about it in terms of size, right? So they may be able to arrange themselves, and this is always a fun thing to do, or start with like a small group. And can you arrange yourselves in order of tall, taller, tallest, or short, shorter, shortest, where they're getting that language to apply to 3 things using that same terminology, right? And that they're able to do that maybe with themselves, maybe it's with their shoes, which one's long, longer, longest. Maybe it is, with some pieces of string that they found and they're wanting to kind of compare them, or it needs to be at least, this long to fit between the 2 towers we've built. And so I want to measure it and see and figure out that it needs to be at least 12 inches. And so I'm going to get out a ruler and see, is it at least 12? And I'm starting to use measurement more intentionally and more purposefully in pre-K than I may have been. Same thing with time, right? Like in the 3s, we talked about how yesterday was the past, like literally anything that happened in the past happened yesterday. And tomorrow is the future. Same thing, anything that's going to happen, that's happening tomorrow. Now they're really starting to relate those to days of the week and understand things like, if today is Thursday, then tomorrow is Friday and we're going to have Shabbat on Friday. Or if today is Thursday, then yesterday was Wednesday. And I know that Wednesday is our swimming day, so we went swimming yesterday. And they're able to link those more with calendars that document what we're doing in the classroom. They're able to link them more with occurrences. So it might be last weekend when we were home, we went to a park and got to play and kick the soccer ball around, sort of thing. So they're able to start talking about time in a more meaningful way. With patterns, they're sequencing things that happen in steps of 6 or up to a series of 6. So it might be 6 steps to get through getting ready for to go to school. So I might have to wake up, use the bathroom, get dressed, brush my teeth, eat breakfast, get in the car. And then tomorrow I'm going to do it all over again. So let's repeat those 6 steps. When we're singing songs, they can use instruments to play simple rhythms. That might be like a quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note. That's like, so they can use rhythm in songs. They can look for meaningful patterns within data. So we were talking about how we counted up to 100 with the days of school or sometimes beyond, right? And every time we get to that tens group that ends in a 0, the next one I recognize starts with a 1. So even if I can't recognize the number 41, if I see it, if I'm looking at it in context, I can figure out that after 40 comes 41, because I know after all the zeros come 1. So they're able to kind of look at information, recognize patterns in it, and then put that into practice. They can describe cyclical patterns. So you might talk about the life cycle of a butterfly, right? You might talk about the life cycle of a plant, of what we're seeing happen out on our naturescape, of in the fall, the leaves start coming off the tree, in the winter, they're bare, in the spring, they start to sprout new buds, right? And that you're describing sort of that cycle that may happen throughout the year. With their scientific experiments, and I think these become more and more formal as they get into pre-K in terms of, we have a problem, let's create a hypothesis that helps us solve that, and then let's test it out, see if it works. They're able to kind of collect data. So we had noticed in my pre-K class a few years back that some water was missing out of the pitcher that we'd left. We'd left like a little bit in it the day before and it was gone, right? And so what happened to that water? And then we started looking at like stages of water and evaporation, and they became really, really interested in how could they stop evaporation and what could we do? What if we put it somewhere dark where there wasn't light? Would it still evaporate? What if we covered it? What if we had it in a different container? You know, all these different things. And we set up experiments where we would get our materials, we would set it up, we would give it a couple days, we would go back, look, and we would write down, make our predictions, and we would write down the results and see if we were accurate in our predictions. And you're seeing like the same thing happen in our classrooms today. So I was in a pre-K classroom a couple weeks ago, and they had a long tube in the building area, and they got a ball stuck in the tube, got stuck down in the end, and they were trying to figure out how could they get it out of that tube. That was the problem, that was the challenge that they had. And so they were trying to figure out what could be long enough or what could have enough force that it could knock that ball out of the tube. And they were doing some measurement to see, is this as long as the tube? No, so maybe we need to try something different. And then is this as long, until they could finally find a rod that was long enough they could jam in this long tube and knock the ball out of the end, right? But that's all them sort of collecting that data of measurement by comparing it, coming up with a prediction, and then following through to see what happens. And then again, sometimes we even spend as much time reflecting on it and how did we do it? What was the process? What did we have to do in order to do it? And then you can talk about, is that something that's a repeatable, you know, strategy sort of thing. So lastly, let's talk about social and emotional skills. So I think my favorite statistic to talk about when it comes to the ability to regulate is that a 4-year-old who's above average in their ability to regulate. So for those of you that are really statistically inclined, 1 standard deviation above the mean is 40% more likely to graduate college by the age of 25 than a 4-year-old who is below that 1 standard deviation above the mean mark. And that's without knowing anything else, without knowing their educational background of the parents, that's without knowing socioeconomic status, anything. It's that ability to self-regulate. And having taught in kindergarten classrooms, that is absolutely one of the things that helps lead to successful outcomes in school, not just in kindergarten next year for your kiddos, but you know, going far beyond that. Obviously it has an impact all the way through college. And so let's look at why that might be. So for effortful control, for being able to control themselves, to put forth effort and being able to intentionally regulate themselves, so they're able to start a task with no reminding or prompting. So if they're supposed to go get their journal, work on their journal for 5 or 10 minutes, they can do that for 5 or 10 minutes and start that and work through it without needing reminders. Oh, remember, you're supposed to be at the table. Oh, remember, it's time that we're working on journals. They're able to regulate themselves to the point where they can do something like that. They're able to quiet down, and sometimes they may need strategies, and they may need to learn strategies that help to do this, right? After active periods running around outside or something like that, and wait for what comes next. So if we're coming in from outside, it may be we come in off the naturescape, we come in, we all sit down on the carpet, We take 3 deep breaths and go, sort of make a balloon and pop it 3 times. And then we're able to talk about what happens next. So they may need that strategy, but they're able to do it. And that when disappointing things happen, or when the plan changes, they're able to remain calm. Again, they may need some help on strategies and they may need some reminders, but they're able to start regulating themselves when things don't maybe go as planned or as hoped. And you can see how this would be successful, right? Like if I need to go to a table to do group work or individual work in kindergarten on my own, and my teacher is with one of the other 20 kids in my classroom, I need to be able to go and I need to be able to do that, right? If I need to make myself do physics homework that I don't really want to do when I'm a sophomore in college, I need to say, you know what, this is important. I need to sit down and I need to do this. So it's happening all the way through, right? That this is one of the things that's really going to help kids be successful academically through their whole academic career. So they're having a lot more self-awareness now, and this manifests itself in a couple of ways. They're really getting to know themselves, their own body, what they like, how they feel, what their abilities are, and they're taking pride in those things. They're developing self-esteem that really says, I am an important person, I can do things well, and they're thinking about themselves positively, right? That's one of the things that we really work on highlighting is what is the, in Judaism, we call it B'Tselem Elohim. What is that unique light within you that is created in God's image that you have to shine in the world? So what are your strengths? And it may be identifying like Billy is expert shoe tire. So if you need help learning how to tie shoes, let's go talk to Billy. But Billy also knows that, it might be a little challenging to cut out fancy shapes. And if that's getting a little frustrating at the moment, to cut out around this intricate drawing he made, he might be able to walk over to Johnny and say, Johnny, can you help me with this? Because Johnny is well known in the classroom to be an expert scissor cutter. So they're seeing that, and they're also understanding those same things about themselves. So they have likes, dislikes, feelings, strengths, challenges, all those things. That's true of other people in the class as well. And they're really starting to see the people in the class as distinct individuals with their own thoughts and feelings. And that's true of the adults too. They're starting to see that maybe you have your own thoughts and feelings at home, or maybe teachers have their own, preferences at school and things like that. And one of the ways that that starts manifesting itself is in the empathy they're able to show, right? Because if I can understand that what it means to be frustrated, and I can see that Billy's frustrated, then I can go over and I can try to say something kind to Billy and say, it's okay, we can try again together. Or I can go to a teacher and say, Billy's really upset right now. Could you help us, please? That those are things that they're noticing and able to act on at this stage because they're seeing people for unique individuals. Problem solving. So like we talked about maybe with that caterpillar and what comes after 40. Well, I know 1 comes after the 0, so it's 41. They're able to apply something to a new situation. If I've learned how to fasten the button on my jeans, maybe on picture day, I'm able to help work through and fasten the button on my shirt. That they can translate a skill or some information they've learned in one way, in one format, to another format. So it's not just in that isolated instance they can do it, but they can generalize it to be useful throughout their lives. That they understand that a problem has a solution, right? That they can come up with a solution for a problem that's given to them and they can test it out. But they also start to understand there are many solutions to a problem. So if we're trying to build a tower in the block area and it keeps falling over, and we're trying to figure out how to stabilize it, I might say, let's go ahead and build more on the sides so it doesn't tip over as easily. And Crystal might say, let's build a wider base at the bottom. And that way it'll be more sturdy and it won't wobble so much at the bottom, right? And both of those are solutions to the problem that we might be able to put, and then they might work, and they might work really well together. if we did both of them, but they're able to recognize that a problem has multiple solutions. They're able to work in small groups. And again, this is another step of being ready for kindergarten the following year. They're able to work in small groups for 15, 20, 25 minutes on a task that interests them. So that may not mean that somebody's going to go and write in a journal for 25 minutes because they may only have 10 minutes worth of journal writing in them. But if they're really into looking at a balance, they may spend 25 minutes looking at a set of objects and trying to figure out which one's the heaviest, right? And while that sounds like, would that really take 25 minutes? If I have 20 objects out to do it with, and I have a student that's really interested, they kind of have to test, is this object heavier or this one heavier? Oh, well, the screw is heavier than the piece of paper, so that's out. But now I have all these other objects I have to compare it to, right? And you can set up things that will engage them if this is something they're interested in for a long period of time, and they're able to sort of work together and extend to it. And, you know, when we were talking about what to expect in the threes, we were talking about children really making the leap from playing the exact same thing with the exact same materials right next to each other, and they're doing the same thing, to actually engaging with each other in that play. Well, now they're not only engaging with each other, they're learning how to be part of a group and play. So if they're creating an elaborate zoo game outside, right, which one of our pre-Ks is doing right now, where they pretend to be animals and they're predators and they're prey, and I'm not sure they know that we don't mix the predators and prey in the zoo at the moment, but in their wildlife preserve or whatever it is outside, they're establishing all these rules for how do you successfully play the game. And if somebody has an idea, they're able to look at that idea and say, how do we fit it in? How do we incorporate it so that if the prey doesn't want to be chased, maybe there's a safe habitat that they can go to. And they're doing that. They're creating that game that they like to play together as a class outside right now. So the last thing I want to talk about is identifying and expressing emotions. So at this age, they're really understanding the distinction between feeling and behaving. So in a 2-year-old or even in a 3-year-old, you may have a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old that's so upset that all they're going to do is push or yell or scream, right? But they're understanding they can separate the emotion from that behavior in pre-K, and they can come up and they can say, I'm really upset right now. I wanted to go out to the naturescape and we had to make a change and stay inside a little bit longer to finish up this project. Or I wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in my lunch today, but instead I got a turkey sandwich and I'm feeling frustrated. They're able to verbalize that as opposed to just act in a way that communicates that they're upset. And they're able to use a range of coping strategy to manage those emotions with the support of an adult, right? So they know that if they're upset, maybe taking a few of those deep breaths where they're blowing up a balloon and letting it out will help get them a little calmer. Or maybe having a stuffed animal to give a hug to if they're feeling sad will help them feel better, right? We can give them those strategies. We can sit with them and do that. And we do that all the time in pre-K, is teach strategies for how to help manage emotions and regulate themselves, because really we're still probably a couple years away from them just independently knowing how to do it, but we can start to plant the seeds for those strategies and the foundation for being successful at that right now in our pre-K classes.
Thanks, Dave. That was a really good look into pre-K. It's funny because I was thinking about what you said early on about the different development of the different children. And I have had 4 kids who have gone through the school. And when they left the J, one of them was reading pretty fluently and writing. Another one was like doing some early reading and writing. Another one was not doing any, but took off in kindergarten. And then my last one was not doing anything, but took off in 1st grade. So they all ended up getting to where they needed to be, you know, just at different times. And so I think sometimes when siblings do differently, it can stress parents out. Oh, are they not ready? Because my other one was reading and writing and this one's not. But, you know, like you mentioned earlier, it's all part of the development.
Well, and I think, the same thing is true within individual children. So I'll use my oldest that just finished here last year as an example. He can do unbelievable mental math and make unbelievable mathematical connections. He has it in his genes. That's my parents' background. And so he loves it. He sees math in a way that I think sees it as like unique and beauty and making meaning in the world. And he can do probably math at an 7, 8-year-old age level. And at the same time, like he went into kindergarten knowing most of his letters, but he knew almost no sight words. He couldn't really put sounds together to make words when he was reading. And, there's part of me as a parent that's like, man, you can do all this amazing stuff with math. Let's just start reading. Like, it would be so much easier if you would start reading. But he wasn't quite ready for it. But now we're a few months into the school year, and he's reading short books. He's reading like 6, 8-word sentences, like 3, 4-word letters. And he's so proud of it because he's able to do it and he's working at it and he loves doing it now. Whereas, like, if that was something that we did try to force on him a few months ago, and we had that moment where we're like, we should really be pushing this harder at home, and trying to do it, it wasn't there in him. And like, I think lucky for us, we backed off because now he has that light and that love and that desire to do it now that he's come to being ready for it. And I think that's really the most important thing. I think research shows that children that are coming from programs that do more flashcards, more worksheets, and things like that may start off a little bit more academically successful and be that way for the first couple of years of school. But really by 3rd or 4th grade, kids that come from programs that are focused on being dynamic thinkers and being able to adapt to situations and enjoy learning and ask questions and find out answers to their questions and really be self-motivated are surpassing those kids that came from the flashword and memorization background. And they just keep shooting up while the kids that haven't learned those skills just may keep creeping up like this. And so, even as a parent that knows that, I still have those urges, but I think, it's important to keep that in mind too, that they're all going to meet those developmental check marks when they're ready to do it. And they may be really ready in one area and not quite as ready in another area within the same kids.
It's a good thing to remember. Well, Dave and Crystal, thank you for taking us deeper into pre-K. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're very lucky to have these 2 experts in curriculum and development here at the J, and they're always happy to talk shop. So reach out to any of us, and thank you for joining us to talk about pre-K. Bye.